So let's quickly go through today's agenda. We are going to be moving towards pretty much the very last part of our JavaScript curriculums here. In terms of the course content outline, you'll be responsible completing the remaining portion of, I think it's chapter 7. Hold on a second. Let me see. The remaining portion of more JavaScript, chapter 8. Okay, from all the way from modules to fetch API. Now, some of the sections are pretty light, like the strict mode, web storage and canvas drawing here. So I think we can afford to go slightly faster and than normal to get through these topics. But yeah, this is more about the styles. This is more about the persistence of the data. This is more about drawing, rendering stuff on a presentation layer of your web page. And the remaining 4 of those are eventing, a way of fetching data remotely from another server. So you use these construct and protocols to get these data. So yeah, today is a composite of sorts. Yeah, these will be your very last homework assignment. There's one quiz, 35 points. When I say more JavaScript take 2, yeah, this is the second part of it, which is what we are going through today, all the way through. You have plenty of time. I give you 90 minutes for 35 questions. Okay, and then the homework assignment is the same as usual, but different challenging activities and participation activities. Your lab assignment 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, so you have slightly more lab assignments than usual, but yeah, you'll manage it. At the completion of this by December 30. Oh, by the way, I made them so that this is due on December 11, not 12. Okay, so this is Monday, so make sure that you don't miss the date. And I believe starting December 12th is the final week anyway, so you'll be taking a whole lot of finals, but you'll be done with this class then. All right, there's no extensions, please, because I believe on the 12 or even 13, I can submit your grade already. And yeah, just get them before it's too late. All right, I think most of you are doing pretty well. And maybe 1 or 2 of you miss the homework once in a while. If this is due to some reason, let me know ahead of time. Well, not ahead of time, afterwards. I may consider having a makeup for maybe I would say 1 make up for the entire semester. So if you miss 1, you get to make up for 1 of them. That would be the only extension I'll make. Okay, otherwise, yeah, don't be late. Today's learning objectives. We're gonna learn modules, which is a way of grouping files together. This is a logical partitions. You can think of it as a way of logically grouping, separation of concerns into several components, so that this helps you build stuff. There's also a debug mode. I call it debug, but this is what's called strict mode. We're going to look at this. So I would think these 2 are pretty lightweight. And as far as the building a web-driven or data-driven web applications, you'll be making use of web storage. You will definitely be making use of promises async and fetch API. These are a pretty common way of fetching data, similar to Ajax. In fact, these things evolve from Ajax. And then WebSocket is just one of the protocols on the web that allows for persistent connections. So we'll talk about what persistent connection means. And then I don't know why the author of this Zybooks puts canvas drawing right in between this web stuff. But technically this drawing, this is rendering. It should be maybe at the beginning or maybe some other chapter. But yeah, we're going to go through these HTML5 canvas facilities to make some animations. All right, so there's various different flavors of different topics today. We're gonna jam everything in today, but it'll be fine because I don't think there's a lot of deep dives at this level. Okay, yeah, I do have my own lectures for all of these. Actually, these 3, I spend about 2 weeks on them. And yeah, if you're interested, actually, I'll see if I can maybe pull some videos off of that as a reference. Okay, then I'll do that after the class, not right now. But yeah, let's focus on Zitebook, on these. And for each of these topics, you should learn, understand, explore, and also try to code. Okay, understanding, exploring, learn, these things are really just on the surface level. But once you get into the challenge activity, which is the part where you can actually make code, try to spend more time doing those than just try to understand. Because understanding something is easy, but when you actually do it, it's a lot different. Okay, so that separates from somebody who's good with concept versus someone who can actually solve problems. Right? One of them is more of a conceptual, and the other one is more of a doer and picker uppers. So you want to be the picker upper type person to solve computer problems. That makes you good, right? And then you can keep on practicing it versus just reading all about it. Okay, so I want to make sure everyone understand what these objectives really means. Not just learning and understanding and exploring, right? You want to do hands-on. Okay, so when we get into, like, for example, local storage, session storage, you can actually do this, right? Inspect element. You can get into the storage section. I think I also had the lectures on this, teaching you how to do it. But yeah, this is the Google debug mode, where you can check into the individual, the storage section of your code. You can also use this console to kind of to help you peruse these. So literally using your Chrome as a debug or IDE to make things happen. Okay, so just when you learn these, you can exercise them and apply them in an IDE inside your browser to see how this works. All right, any questions about objectives? Right, other than that, your responsibility, your reading is 8.7 all the way through 8.15. Okay, all right, let's head over to our chapters. All right, let's start up with modules and see if I can just do the presentation mode. All right, so what is modules? Well, modules is a way of grouping certain functions or libraries. When I say libraries, they're really just classes and functions in JavaScript. Everything is an object. So there are different set of objects responsible for different things. So you can have, a whole bunch of JavaScript library for mathematical manipulations, or you can have a whole bunch of libraries for rendering a cheese ball, whatever. You can have libraries for communication, right? Communicating with a network server, with certain data that you pass in and you get the responses back. So there are various different libraries, or sometimes people call plugins, where you want to, group certain functions or classes that are of certain nature that are sort of logically together. This whole group of things for network communication, this whole group of things for rendering presentations. You put them inside what's called module. So module is a way of just grouping these together, right? It's actually meant for making your code a lot easier to read. And also it introduces a convenient way of, aggregating informations in one spot, right? So one, it increases portability, meaning you can keep porting these modules. You can think of it as like a package that has everything together in there. And if someone else would want to, borrow or make use of what you have inside the package, they just make a copy of that package. And in fact, you don't do copying in JavaScript. You simply just import that module. Okay, import meaning load. Okay, load them in. So this is an example of module. Let's take a look. Well, let's say if you have a travel website with two JavaScript files. One of them is flight, the other one is hotels. One of them is for arranging your flights, and the other one is hotels. And what do you do with them? Well, these are two different files. And if you would want your website or your web applications to make use of these two JavaScript, you have to do a script, right? And load them in there. So this is one way to do it. But then this way of doing things is not very portable because let's say if you have another web app, another contracting firm working on, and this is another version, they'll have to do the same thing over there to bring these two files together, right? So we all kind of know this introduces a lot of duplicity. If you want this to be a little more portable, then we can use what's called modules. So let's take a look at the next. All right, so this is the problem because you have two variables. Then one of them is declared in hotel, and the other one is flight. The problem is there's different, definition of them. This constant means this is a read only, and every time you create this, declare this variable and assign a value to it, that there's a memory that is set aside to store this variable, and you just introduce the same thing on the other side, and this creates an error. But JavaScript, a lot of times, doesn't tell you that. You'll see these errors in console, meaning if you inspect element, go over the console, you see a lot of errors popping out here, okay? Like here. But user is not going to see it. So this is problematic because you have a lot of bugs in the back, and JavaScript just lets you have those bugs. But your code doesn't work because JavaScript, bails on this. So this max variable is really not going to work since you use this error. So every time you have max, this max is not going to give you anything. In fact, it's probably going to give you some garbage, and your function is going to be out of whack, right? That's a problem. So let's take a look at the next one. What you can do is convert the JS file, these two JS files, right, into a module, one module that gives developer control over which items are exported from the JS file. So you can kind of think of, flight and hotel. These are bundled right into this modules or this package, and then you can let the developers to import that whole module and decide which, functionality, right, the developer wants to use. Let's say, if I were to, package both flight and hotel into a utility module, for example, I can say I want to import that import that utility module, but I want to use flight, okay, the flight items inside the package, but I don't want to use anything else. That's okay, but this gives developer a choice, right, an option to select, whichever informations that he or she wants. So that's really essentially what this the use case of a module. So right now you have two separate modules. One of them is this, right, and is the constant max that's defined in here, and then there is a export. There's a keyword that basically means loading in the memory. So you would explore this entire object called purchase ticket. Remember, a function is an object in JavaScript. So you import this object, in this flight, and this is still problematic because we have two different modules here. Let's look at the next one. All right. So let's say if you have a web page, and this web page has dependencies on these two JavaScript files, but really what your web page or web app is interested in is the purchase ticket object inside the flight and the book room object. This whole object is the whole function, or in ES6, this would have been a class. That you want this entire class purchase ticket and this entire class book room to be extracted right from these JavaScript. You don't care about this max 10. These are used still, but you don't import them like this the raw way upstairs. It's going to give you an error, right? But if you kind of put them into the modules like this, and this whole module has the syntax called type equals module. You might have seen this also in Node.js. Some of you probably use Node.js. They use CommonJS. So there's different modularization standards. These things are very specific to the tech stack. So what we're doing here is a generic module that can be used in a native JavaScript to allow you to kind of bundle these things. And the module syntax is, yeah, you use the regular script tag and you just call it modules. And this is where you kind of bundle, your objects that are extracted from these files. So this entire flight.js could have like 10,000 different functions in it. You're only interested in purchase ticket, so be it. Just take it. And you're only interested in book room from hotels.js, and the rest of it, don't care. You don't have to import it, right? So this is kind of a way of be really selective about what you need, right, from this group of things. And you don't have to worry about having some sort of named collisions at runtime. If you do it this way, then everything collides and then you get these errors everywhere. But if you kind of transform or convert these JS into a module, right, this bundle, and use it in this fashion with the import statement and from, this allows you to be selective about what you need. And this is what gets loaded in memory and not the entire file, right, of functions or classes. Does it make sense? Yeah, this overview is pretty short. We can look at a couple things. One of them is what's called export. So when you have a module that uses an export statement, at least to be exported, this becomes available. So the default keywords is used for a single one item to export. So you can think of these functions as items. Okay, they call them items. I call them objects. So this item say hello and this item say hi will be available if you were to put them in this JavaScript format. So they become modularized, if you will. So this then could be used in the context of this. Does it make sense? So if you don't have the original JavaScript that exports these things, they don't get modularized. Okay, so they'll simply just be functions, and then you'll run into the same problem, collisions, if you were to have function of the same names and things like that. So this is kind of a way of telling the external world that, hey, I want to expose my say hello and say hi, these things. If you don't export, that means they'll just be private. They'll just be sitting inside these modules. Actually, not modules, but they'll just be internal, and they're not, and they cannot be imported that way, like this. Okay. So you'll see, in order for purchase ticket to be importable, you have to export it in the origin file, and you can select choose to export only one. If you do export only one of them, then you call it default. So really the difference between default and export versus export default is default only has one item. Export has one to many. You can also use export. I honestly don't really understand why we care about default. What if you don't default this and you still export, say goodbye? Why do you need default? This just confuses. Anyway, so JavaScript has some weird stuff from time to time, and this has been around for ages, several decades. So it's not for me to judge, but this has been around since the beginning of time. The import statement is when you have to use it, right, from the client side. This is more from the source side. From the client side, you do the import statement and you decide on what to be imported from the whole modules. Okay, so by virtue of having this export statement at the very end of your JavaScript or export default, you make these JavaScript module. Okay, so you transform your normal JavaScript into modules, and as such, items inside the modules could be exported, using the import statement at the client side. Does it make sense? So let's take a look at the example. So there are 5 steps here. There are 2 modules you're looking at, right? One of them is the hello.js and the other one is goodbye. and goodbye only has one item, so you said export default, and you also export the 2 items inside your hello.js. There's nothing going on here. Let's move on. So now you have an index HTML. This is your HTML that uses a script tag, right? And then you say you want to create a module, and inside this modules, you want to import, so and so from hello.js. You want to import say goodbye from, goodbye.js, so on and so forth. And once you import it, you can actually call it. Okay, so this means that the entire function object or function class is not loaded in memory. So you can think of it as being compiled and already lock and loaded, ready to use, right? So by virtue of doing this on the client side, so this is more, so when I say client, I meant on the recipient side of things. And the source is your server side. So this is server side, this is the client side. On the client side, you use a script tag with a type equals modules, and then you use import to specify what functions you want to bring or load it into this index.js, this entire web page. Make sense? Okay, let's move on to the next one. Now, what does that mean? There is a dot and /. So this dot is a Linux notation for indicating current directory, and the / is the relative path. Okay, so this means that this dot / means in the current directory there is a hello.js, but current relative to what? Current relative to the location index. So if index.html is in the same folder as where your where your hello.js is, that's exactly the notation you need. Okay, so let me illustrate this. Let's say if you have your this folder called Joe index.html, right, in this folder. All right, so the next up you have Joe / PCC, and then you put hello.js. Okay, then what this needs to be, right, is from, so we're gonna have to rewrite this, right? Now we know index.html is the root in the root folder, but your hello.js is in the root folder's PCC folder. Does it make sense? So this needs to be from, like, current directory of index.html is dot, right? Relative to this location, there's a PCC folder, and there is hello.js. Make sense? So if hello.js was sit inside this PCC folder, then your import statement is going to look like this, from dot PCC. And make sure you have a double colon here, okay? Double quote, not colon. Any questions about this? So this is relative path, okay, to index.html. So this is very important. This is also the source of a lot of confusions and mistakes for beginner JavaScript developers. All right, just make sure that you get your directory path correct, right, to solve a lot of issues. All right, so let's move on to the next step. The second import statement imports a default function from goodbye.js. Yes, as such, since this is a default, yeah, you don't have to do a parentheses. Not parentheses, what do you call it? The curly braces. Okay, this is just syntax. All right, since they are imported, meaning they are locked and loaded, you can invoke them, right, in the context of this entire script. Remember, script allows you to write JavaScript, right? So if you say hello, this is JavaScript. This whole thing is JavaScript, and these JavaScript will be interpreted by your just-in-time JavaScript interpreter in your browser. Okay, as soon as this HTML is loading the body section of this entire script, while the HTML continues to get loaded into the DOM, your script will be running on a separate thread to try to execute this. Well, first of all, the script is going to be loaded in memory, Specifically, these functions will be declared and compiled in memory, and they are ready to use. And then these things will be executed one at a time, sequentially, by the second thread. The first thread will continuously render the remaining portion of your HTML. The second thread, which is triggered by this entire script, will then finish executing, say hello, say hi, and say goodbye. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about this?
Professor, if your data.js is in a different directory, do you use absolute path?
Yeah, this is in a completely different.
It's let's say it's that dot slash, it's in the same folder as all of the HTML, the index.html. But just in case, let's say you have another folder that is different, a different directory where the hello.js sits or goodbye.js sits, do you do a absolute path in that and indicate what drive or what folder directory location that is?
No, you don't do absolute. Absolute is very confusing. First of all, in order for this to be absolute, you have to specify the DNS location, which actually takes you out of your code, in the current service space. So typically, yeah, if you have another, let's say, resource folder, that resource folder hopefully isn't too far away from this index. You will simply do something like, from, I'm just making this up, right? You can, back out of the current by using 2 dots, and then you can back again. You can also back again. I've seen this before. Like, you just keep on backing out of the directory, and then you just keep going up and up and up and up, right, until you get to the location of that new root, and there's a PCC folder, and then / whatever, right? You'll do something like this. Okay, you don't do, HTTP, for whatever the local host. Like, you don't do that, because remember, this entire thing is served from a server, right? Your server probably doesn't have access to localhost. Your server doesn't have access to, CNN.com, whatever. So you got to be careful of using, some absolute path there. You can also do, localhost is the same as 127.0.0.1. But then again, this has to be configured, right, inside the server. So you may not have, you may not be taken to the same location. That's what I'm saying. Because when the entire HTML page gets loaded, the server has a default index.html location. And that default index.html location is actually coded. Let's just say if you use a Tomcat, right, which is a Java container for a server, and you inside the Tomcat server file, the default index location, which 127.0.0.1 is pointing to, may not be the location of this index file. This index file could be a different index file. So it just creates a lot of confusions. And then, you literally have to dissect the server config to look into what is inside that server config to figure out what the absolute path should be. Rather, you should just use the relative path. Okay, so this is a very long-winded answer to your questions.
Thank you very much, Professor.
No problem. Any questions? All right, so we're still good. Looking at time, we are still good. Oh, that's it. Look, we're done with modules. All right, this modules, it's going to be, something that you would see quite frequently in web development, especially in Node.js. And so just to make sure that you understand what this is, okay? A lot of times you see this, what the heck is this? Now you know, right? Okay, that's called modules. All right, next up is what we call strict mode. All right, the reason why we have this thing called strict mode is, well, it's kind of interesting when, we said there is a strict mode, then what about the normal mode? Wouldn't that be relaxed mode? Well, it turns out by default, JavaScript is relaxed, meaning it could do a lot of things that you don't want it to. And a lot of times it doesn't give you indications on why this thing is wrong. So JavaScript is pretty laid back, and as such, lots of people make mistake, and JavaScript doesn't tell you that. This is the reason why we have strict mode. Is to help developers, become better developers in JavaScript, and make sure that the context, if there's any bug, this strict mode would output them, right? So I'll give you one example. Let's say if you have this human lives remaining equals 3, which is a variable. Okay, it doesn't really do anything. A new variable, human lives remaining, is created and assigned 1 unintentionally, right? So you create this, and now, okay, so that now is 1. So you have human lives remaining equals 3, and then another one called human lives remaining 1. This is the problem. I wonder what's human life remaining still 3. So this is the problem. You have when. Hold on a second. Yeah, this is the bug, because when you are inside this block scope right there, this human lives remaining here is locally. Hold on a second. It's not locally. This is a different spelling. So this is another thing, right? JavaScript doesn't, unless you're using an IDE, JavaScript actually doesn't tell you that you have something very similar, but this is a different thing. So the problem here is you made a spelling mistake. So looking at this, and I was like, no, this is the same. No, these aren't different. So you make the spelling mistake, but JavaScript doesn't tell you that. So the mistake will just propagate, down to the end of, I don't know, whenever this ends, downloading. That's the problem. So, what do you do with it? Well, I want to use strict mode. I want to turn on something in strict mode. So JavaScript will actually give me some errors. And that's the whole reason why we're using this. So this is a variable naming that is difficult to detect. How's strict mode going to fix that? Well, strict mode is not going to fix it, but it's going to give you some sort of hint as you code, as you load your JavaScript, your faulty JavaScript code in memory. So strict mode is at play usually, normally after you launch your JavaScript in a browser or in a IDE. This basically means strict mode makes the JavaScript interpreter apply a set of very restrictive syntax rules to JavaScript code. So normally when you launch a JavaScript code in production, you will want to get rid of strict mode, right? You want to disable it. So strict mode is only good when you debug, when you're actually working on a code in a test environment or in a lower environment, not in production. So the way to do it is to use strict, okay? You don't import strict mode, you use it, right? That's what you do. All right, let's look at these animations. So use strict enables strict mode on the very top. So this is what you do at the very top of your JavaScript, and says everything else after that is going to be strict. And strict and introduces some additional syntax. The same thing here, with respect to the previous one, you would declare human lives remaining is at 3 and keep going. So now there is a problem. Now, because JavaScript hasn't seen, this human lives remain, right? This misspelled variables getting declared anywhere else. Your JavaScript runtime is then throw the reference error exception. Now this thing is only available when the strict syntax is applied through use of strict mode. Okay, so this is going to give you a reference error. In fact, if you go to the console in JavaScript, you'll see these exceptions in there. And that's it. Exceptions are displayed in browser developer console, and this is the console we're talking about, like right here, right here. All right, this is actually from this entire Zeit book, and I have no idea what this is. 503. It looks like a server issues, so something wasn't loading. But you'll see reference to error exception when you do something like this is if you want to do a test, you can copy and paste this entire piece of code, try to run it in a script inside your Google developer console. Okay, and you'll see it. All right, any questions about strict mode? Yeah, so it depends on where you apply use strict. If you have use strict inside a function, that means everything inside this function, right, stays inside of the function. That's it. Now, what is outside of that scope? Remember this, we're talking about scope here, functional scope. This other function is not going to be strict, right? Only the one that is scoped strict inside of it, would all of the logic sitting inside that scope, that function scope, be applied. Otherwise, no. Okay, so this is a very important thing that that I wanted to. Sorry about that. Hold on a second. Yeah, any questions about this? All right, sounds good. Let's move on to the next one.
I got a question about JS. So I know we cannot fully rely on strict mode to do feature testing because it has its own. It looks out for certain, I guess, certain grammars or certain rules that it looks for. So my question is like whether JS has its own like unit testing module that you recommend people to use for debugging.
Oh, it depends on the framework. So if you're
Okay.
using React or Angulars, these things will have their own, like Mojito test framework. There's a lot of them out there that test code. What
Okay.
the strict mode is not really for debugging. It's more for, if there's well, it's actually for debugging, but it's also for when, when something is blatantly wrong. You want to know it. You don't need to test it. It's from a syntactical standpoint, it is not working. That you want to know right away. It's like, writing a piece of Java code or C++ code when syntax is not working. These languages, they have compilers. JavaScript doesn't have compilers, so they just let it. They interpret this as an error, but they sort of just absorb these errors. You
Yeah.
don't see it until you turn on the syntax, strict mode. But C, Java, they compile. The compiler will tell you that.
I think Perl has that too. I remember
Yes.
when I used Perl, you have to turn that on.
Yeah, it's a similar thing. So yeah, these things help catch syntactical errors. But yeah, those test framework you're talking about, those are more about functionalities, integrations, and they're at a higher level. They don't catch your syntax. That's the differentiations. All right, any other questions about that strict mode? All right, let's move on to web storage. I think we're doing pretty well. So web storage API is part of your browser. This is very browser specific. And what this means is you can store data in the browser. One example is, and you probably have seen it already, is let's say if I were to use Gmail, right? You log into Gmail, check your mail, and your browser simply has this capability of remembering, right, of what your username, password, maybe not password, but username was that you previously entered. And that is like, where does this thing come from? Well, it's actually sitting inside your cache, browser cache, like part of browser cache. Well, it could be in the cookies, but it could also be in the local storage. This local storage allows certain objects, right, to be stored. And these are key value pairs, by the way. There's a key, there's a value. And yeah, so I don't know what they look like, but it's very likely that whatever got stored and remembered is either sitting inside your local storage or cookies. Or it could be in the session storage. There's actually a huge difference between the two, but these are the main storage inside the browser. One of them is called session storage, and the other one is local storage. Local storage is very persistent. Information that gets stored inside the browser, they don't really get deleted. They basically, there is, I forgot, I don't think there's a TTL. TTL means time to live. And this is a very common term that they use software development to indicate that the data expires after some time. So since there is no TTL for local storage, these key value pairs just store there indefinitely. And in fact, if you write in an application and put a whole lot of stuff into storage today, next year, if you come back, these things will still be in the browser, okay? Assuming your computer still works a year later, the browser is still there, and you haven't expunged any, cache or data inside the browser, or you're reinstalling it, those information will still be in there. That's local storage. Key value pairs, right? That gets in there. Session storage, on the other hand, is more about sessions. You guys know what a session is? Well, session is a networking term that describes when a client server makes handshakes to connect with each other, and that communication, it's almost like, let's say if you go to a bank and you have a safe deposit, you have to perform some sort of security handshakes, meaning you have to let the banker see your ID. They have to validate you as a person to authorize access, and then you have to have the key, right? So that's the right. There's a whole lot of steps going on there. That's security handshake. That's what we call in industry handshakes. So once you establish that handshakes, meaning the server and client understands each other and authenticate and authorizes your access, you now have this channel, right? Communication channel where information can freely go through them, right? That's what we call sessions, right? Another example of session is you go to Amazon.com. Okay, I'm just using Amazon. It could be eBay, doesn't matter. You log in. So the moment that you log into that website, you establish a whole bunch of handshakes going on, and they try to validate that, and authenticate you and try to see if you're the person who entitles the resources from Amazon.com. So after all that, which is your browser, and Amazon server establish a session between the two. And doing this session is where you can start, start shopping for your Black Friday items and whatever on Amazon.com, and then you can put information into your card, right? So this session allows, that sort of communication, right, between your browser and Amazon. So the thing is let's say if, you would accidentally close the browser, what happens? That session is severed, right? Amazon sees that, oh, Joseph just left, right? But somehow Amazon remembers on the network balancer side, there is a, actually this is on NLB, which is a network load balancer. There is what's called persistent session option, where Amazon server actually remembers, like quote unquote remembers, what your previous session was. So you can quickly launch your web page and get into, the Amazon web page. You can still see the items in the cart, right? And some of you probably did this, right? Like you're buying some stuff on some website like Nordstrom.com, Macy. Whatever, and Bloomingdale's, and you put something in the cart and you close the web browser and you come back, like 2 minutes later, they're still inside the right. So sometimes the server remembers that session, so they reestablish this session. They'll remember what you have there. Actually, there's a lot more stuff that goes on there, like making these transactions independent so that they don't, they can persist through time and things like that. But these are more advanced web development concepts. The point I'm trying to make is there is what's called session storage on your browser. This session storage is very transient, and they're not like your persistent local storage where things just get stored there indefinitely, right? With session storage, these things, it's also key value pairs, but they kind of disappears after some time. So session has a TTL, like time to live. Let's say if you're, talking to Amazon, trying to buy something, and then you just let it sit, or you're on Chase.com or BankAmerica.com, right? Looking at your bank account, And after 30 seconds of inactivities, or maybe 5 minutes, whatever, each website is different. Your session expires, and boom, you're locked out, right? So a lot of times the information's in a session expires on themselves if you don't do anything with the transactions. A lot of times they get deleted as soon as you close the web browser, right? By closing the tab by mistake, browser tab by mistake. Or you can close the entire window responsible for maintaining that storage. That entire window is gone, browser window. Then your key value pairs in that session storage is gone. Okay, so there is a transientness associated with data stores inside the session storage. There is no transient data. There is persistent storage inside local storage. So these are the two differences. Does it make sense? Any questions about these two? Now, what does it have to do with the web storage API? Well, remember web storage API. What is API? Application Programming Interface, right? These are methods that, or you can think of it as a key for you to unlock the data sitting inside these type of storages. So web storage API allows you to access information inside session storage and local storage. Okay. And then there's like set items, there's get items. Remember, this looks a lot like data structure, right? In fact, it is. What's inside the local storage and session, these are map, right? Hash maps that allows you to sort key and value pairs inside of them. And key is unique, so there's no collisions. And you can use this key to get the items. So these items are values, right? Get value, pretty much. Set item is like set value. So you set key and value. Anyway, yeah, hopefully this is self-explanatory, but this is the first time that you're looking at map. You can go back to Java map, or if you did Python before, I think in CIS12 when you study Python, they used map. So there's a similar item. You can think of it as an associative dictionary, right? Kind of like that. All right, so there's also remove, there's a clear. Clear actually expunge a lot of, like, all of your keys. Like they're permanently deleted when you do clear. So as you can see, you can effectuate a lot of these information either by removing them, updating them, or deleting them, or inserting them through use of web storage API. And the data store are either session storage or local storage. Okay, you can actually specify which one you want to put information into. Questions? Yeah, if not, then let's run some animations here. All right, so so these are form, right? You have two inputs. One of them is the player name. The other one is difficulty level. Okay. Now your local storage is quite empty, and then you have this JavaScript on the bottom. This is your HTML. The JavaScript portion, let's look at it again. You have get items, but because your local storage is pretty much empty, there is nothing that you can get out of this. So this is not even going to be executed. Meaning like these items, like these code, 2 lines of code never get reached. All right, and then user change the player. Let's go through step number 3 again. All right, so somebody changed the player, right? You can kind of see on the settings side, it used to be, player 1 and 1, and now it's Jenny and 3. Okay, and then you hit save. So what happens is when you do save, well, let's take a look at what happens. Yeah, if the save button, right, it's got the click, meaning you click on save, right, this save button right there, then this entire function expression is going to be executed. This function expression says, yeah, I want to set the player name that was just entered in there, and I want to set the level. So all of a sudden you see this, right? Let's play this number 4 again. Yeah, you change player 1 to, right? So this goes in there, and yeah, local storage fetches the data. Actually, no, set the data in there. So all of a sudden you have this local storage inside. All right, let's look at number 5. So you have, so the very next time when the entire page gets loaded, meaning if you do a refresh, right, F5, right, on a web page, then this JavaScript will be called, and it's gonna go and look inside the local storage and see if there's a player name. And true enough, you had Jenny and difficulty level number 3 from before the reload, right? Your page reload. Then that information will be permanently displayed. So this is a lot of times this is similar to, let's say, if you log in web page, right? If let's say if you go to ebay.com, you don't have to enter username. Somehow the website actually remembers what your username was. So they're using local storage, but in a more secure way, because I don't think they put this in the plain text. But the website, works with local storage to fetch that information from. So these are information that is local to your computer. So when you reset or clear all of the resources and cache on your browser, or even reinstall your entire Chrome browser and come back, those local storage will be gone because you have a fresh copy of browser, and everything, including local storage, is just a blank slate. Right? There's nothing in there. All right, you do have a challenge activity though. This is where I really want you to, at your own time, to code, okay, and try to figure this out. Let's move on to canvas drawing. Any questions so far? All right, I'll just give you one mentions on this. This canvas drawing is something that, yeah, developers would do maybe a decade, 2 decades ago. I mean, we still do this maybe once in a while, but you don't really do this a lot unless you just want something about HTML, CSS. I think this canvas drawing is a very cool stuff that you can do a lot of times on your own and create something really fun for, as an introductory sort of lessons and, a foray into JavaScript. But this is not something that, in industry you don't see this much in industry, but it's good for learning experiences because one, it gives you an idea on how Canvas works in the web browser, and using these Canvas allows you to build animations, allows you to manipulate objects, and animation part is pretty interesting because this is how you manipulate presentation to make something moves and capture people's attentions. And as such, you can think of this entire canvas kind of like a slate. It's like a blank slate. You can specify this entire HTML and with the canvas, and you can use JavaScript, or this is the web browser JavaScript, not the native JavaScript. This web browser JavaScript is called Canvas API. Give you the context, which is the drawing service of the canvas. So it always starts with context, right? This white page, and you have 2D context, you have 3D context. You can also do this in three-dimensional, so you can build the 3D objects. But let's start with 2D. You set the canvas, okay, elements by ID, and this is the size of it, and with certain borders and whatnot. You get the context in 2D. So this entire 2-dimensional canvas is now ready for painting, right? And then you can paint stuff on it. You can fill this context with the style, with the rec, stroke cycle, line rate. So you don't have to memorize this, right? But you can find a lot of this information in, let me see, there is, I think it's probably in the next section. Oh, maybe not. Hold on, I have to exit the presentation view. You can scroll all the way at the end, right? These things. You can go in there and kind of see what's out there. Yep, so this entire canvas drawing starts with, these APIs, and then you can get into, just like the animation ones, you can get in there and learn more about it. So yeah, in fact, I've seen people create very interesting games, like even this entire thing, this poker thing. You can build all that using Canvas, CSS, HTML, and this web API is JavaScript. So this allows you to build these be very versatile. And yeah, in the early days, you see a lot of HTML games. A lot of them are kind of built using this. Okay. And yeah, in fact, you can play around with this begin path move to. I just feel like this thing should be part of CSS and HTML. But because we're dealing with JavaScript, and this is JavaScript, so that's how we get to it. So you begin. So we understand we have to set 2D, and then we can begin the path. This is the starting location of the path. Means essentially the starting point. And move to means this is the pixel numbers, right? That you have this green dot. Wait, why is it green? Actually, don't see it green. Anyway, I don't know where this green dot came from.
I think they're just pointing out the coordinates, or they're marking it so you can see it clearly.
Yeah, I know, but I was hoping maybe they made it so it doesn't look green, and it's weird. Anyway, so yeah, you can draw the line 2 at this location. It'll actually connect the 2. What if it's a line 2, it'll connect, right? So this looks very straightforward. And then there's another line that connects. Okay, fine. Yeah, you guys can just keep going, and you can see the close path. So you want to close it, and this gives you a triangle. You can fill the triangle with yellow. You can use the stroke style in red. All right. Yeah, so you can play around. This is, in fact, if you go straight to the bottom there, I don't want to bore you with this, and you can see a lot of examples in here. And this is like the standard documentation. You can go to W3 School. They have a lot of examples there that allows you to kind of play around with this. Okay. All right. Any questions about Canvas rendering? Yeah, this is actually a very fun set of exercises, but I just don't think we ought to spend a lot of time on these, is because they're very, very self-explanatory. Like if you want to create a stroke, you can actually create an arc as well, and then specify the radian or the degree to build them out. Yeah, so this is the arc, with like pi. So yeah, so I think pi is 180 degree, and right, 2 pi is right, whatever. So pi, half the pi is 90 degree. Anyway, so you can play around with this and get to maybe a shape like this. You can also get to a shape like this. Yeah, just go through the API. I think this is more about like reading the API, understanding what this API is doing, and making sure that everything starts with a creation or instantiation somewhere. But before you can do anything, you gotta set the context, right? So every time you have Canvas, the very first beginning portion of that code is setting the context. Like, oh, I'm sorry, get context, not set. Yeah, this is actually sitting inside of your browser, and that presentation layer has a set of Canvas API where you can apply these methods to make something happen. Okay, so right now this is just about drawing some stuff, and it's not really moving anywhere, right? So you can draw. The next chapter is more about how do you make a move, right? So there is 2 types of movement. One of them is transformation. The other one is animation. So transformation is all about, rotation or translation, meaning moving from one side to the other. Scaling means you can actually magnify it or shrink it. So there are 3 types of translation, and you can do them while you animate them. Okay, so this is what's cool about it. Then you can see a ball, going from left to right of your screen, and as it moves from left to right, it'll increase in size or shrinks accordingly, or even rotate. So you can do all that by doing this. So there's really not much of a JavaScript. This is more about using API in a declarative way versus writing a for loop and say, hey, I equals 0, I, right? And then you just I plus plus. You don't do these things. So this is all about just setting the canvas, invoking the right API to make them, change color, to make them change size, to make them move from left to right, to change their speed so that they can animate from one side to the other, in a certain fashion. So there's a lot of these things that I played where you can, make changes to. So this is the HTML canvas, similar to your image. This is animations now. You set your canvas up in black, 2 pixels solid, origin 0, 0. And the very first thing you do is you set your canvas up, get the context 2D, and start drawing them. And you can fill this out. You can set an arc and then fill, right? So this gives you a red circle filled. You can then do another translation to begin your path and start to translating it. So translation means from left to right, and you can specify a degree as well. And then you can draw. Yeah, so this is very mechanical. In fact, if you get really good at this context drawing, you can pretty much draw these things, anytime you like on canvas. So the best way to go about it is just copy this and put it in the JavaScript. You can run this whole thing in the Google IDE right here by you use you can have your HTML and also JavaScript locally and load them in and this browser, and then you can debug it that way. The same exact thing, and it'll show up, on your browser. This traffic light. All right. Yeah, so this is like drawing 3 different circles by translating them from the origin. And what else? Yeah, and then you can kind of do the overlay by this is part of your participation activity. Yeah, so try this. And yeah, just mimic this. It'll get you this. Okay, so they expect the image. All right, you can also rotate an image by a certain degree, and this is the pi. So pi is 180 degree. So pi divided by 10 is 18 degree. So you can rotate them by 18 degree along the central axis, and you can specify whether you want positive rotation or negative rotations. Yeah, so this is about that. You can set these rotation degree to negative and see how it goes. Okay. All right, there's also, yeah, we talked about translation, rotation. There's also scaling. Let me see, there's the scaling right here. Yeah, I think the scaling is right here. This allows you to kind of magnify something and also shrink something. You can specify the top left corner. Again, this is all very mechanical. You have to read the API. The best way to go about it is this. Right, this is rotation examples. All right. Yeah, we're not gonna have time to go through this, but yeah, you guys get the idea. Does it make sense? I mean, am I going too fast on this? I am going a little fast on this because, yeah, I think typically you can have, maybe you can dedicate the entire lecture to going through a lot of these lab exercises, and then you'll figure out, some of the to-dos and not to-dos, from practicing this. Yeah, but this is all very API declarative driven type of exercises where you just study someone else's library and make use of the methods sitting inside this canvas of context, this context on top of the canvas to to draw something, to move something, to animate something. Okay. All right, so that's like super high level overview of the canvas. Any questions about canvas at all? Okay, yeah, if anything, I think this will probably be the most straightforward part of JavaScript, right? All right, so let's quickly talk about WebSocket. This is a completely different topic, okay? So a lot of times when a client and server communicate with each other, they establish what's called TCP/IP connections. This is a TCP/IP connection. So once the connection is set, there's a socket. Socket is a number. It's the port number, and TCP/IP. For example, if this is TCP/IP on the browser level, let's say you type in pcc.com or edu, then that's port 80. Okay, in a web browser. So there's different port. TCP/IP requires a port number, and it gives you a WebSocket. So once you establish that TCP connection, client talks to the server then respond with the answer. It's very it's not continuous, right? So one person has to initiate, and the other party then responds. It's kind of that way. But if you don't talk to each other for an extended period of time, guess what? The whole TCP/IP connection severs, right? There's no more. Now, this whole WebSocket is very interesting because this is a persistent polling, meaning you would establish a connection with your server, and there's this continuous pulling of information. It's not about client pulling the server. It's more about client sending an AJAX request periodically to website asking you new data is available. So polling is pretty bad because it's client initiated, and then you have to send it and keep on asking the server, hey, right? This is all within the context of TCP/IP connections, and you want to pull it frequently enough so that this whole connection doesn't get disconnected. Now, WebSocket is it's not the same as pulling information continuous on client to server. This is more about the real-time communication. So a lot of times you want client and server to establish that connection, and you just keep on refreshing the data without having the client asking for it. So one example is stock ticker, right? You want your web browser to automatically refresh, right, that information without writing JavaScript code to continuously pull, right, POLL, to pull the server. So you set up a WebSocket protocol allowing a real-time communication data to come through. And that is what's really cool about WebSocket, because it gives you a sense that informations are real-time and they are automatically received by a client without having the client to always ask for new things. So WebSocket allows the server to notify a browser instantly when new data arrives. This is what's really cool about this is, and in fact, WebSocket is still being used quite a bit. Just a couple of years ago, I built something for a company, and then that information is using real-time data, and in fact is part of the live TV stream data for predicting the election winners during presidential elections. So those real-time data are driven using WebSocket protocols between client and server. So this is this WebSocket allows for real-time, and two is it allows for the bypass of polling, right? So information is real-time. You don't have to do a client initiated request. So whenever server has new information, server tells the client, hey, there's new information, and client gets that signal and and serves it in the presentation layer. So this whole socket protocol is available in PHP, Node.js, right? There's a lot of libraries that are available in these language. You can also, I think there's also one in Java, one in Python, so on and so forth. So you can use these language and download their WebSocket libraries and APIs to make something happen. This is an example of how WebSocket works. Right, you would, so this one uses WSS protocol. This is WebSocket. and this is the URL. It's different than HTTP. Okay, and then what you need to do is to put this URL in there, assuming this this WebSocket server is already out there. Actually, this this WebSocket event. All right, so the very first thing is you would do an open socket and said, yeah, and as soon as you do that, you display connected. The next thing is you want to send information to, right, the other side. So this is web browser sending information to the WebSocket server. So far, so good. Right, and this hello socket, wait, hold on a second, let's go back. So this is browser or client initiated informations. The next one is the server that replies the same message back to the browser. Right. So all you need to do is do WebSocket send. Right. This information is initiated from the party who makes that open socket, and the information is immediately echoed back. Right. And this is part of the WebSocket. Right. So this display message is hold on a second. Yeah. So the message event is triggered when the data is received from the server. This automatically tells the client, hey, the information was received by the server, and that information was hello WebSocket. Okay. So this is done automatically. So you can think of it as there's some sort of glue in between the two once the WebSocket connection is open. When server does something, client gets it, right? There's some sort of callback. All right, so close is called after 2-second delay to close the WebSocket connections. So there is a timeout of 2 seconds, and this says in 2 seconds execute this. Okay, and this set timeout is loaded as soon as this entire blue box, right, is loaded in the browser memory. So as soon as like these things are done, there is a timeout of 2 seconds, and when 2 seconds hits, WebSocket.close is executed, and then boom, your WebSocket is out, is done with, and it says disconnected. Right. So you see this WebSocket on close, on open, right? Message. So these are asynchronous. It's almost like doing a event registration and said, hey, when this event is a close, then execute this. When this event is a message just received, then do this. When this event is just opening the socket, getting an acknowledgement from the other side, hey, the socket or this channel is already open, then do this. Right. So there's 3 different sort of event registrations on this level with a timeout at the end to close the socket. That's essentially what this entire thing is really about. Right. So what's the learning out of this? Well, the learning out of this is WebSocket protocol is not your traditional HTTP. It's a different protocol that transact real-time info, where information could be is sent from the client once the socket is open, and boom, every time something happens on the server side, client gets it, right, through these event registrations. They are asynchronous, right, in real time. So instead of having the client to keep on just pulling the server, hey, did you get info? And then another milliseconds later, hey, did you get another info? Another millisecond later, hey, did you get another info? So this is how this continuous real-timeness was established in the old days. So we don't do that anymore, right? We use the newer protocol that allows for sort of automatic real-time notification or glue that is between your client and server. And this entire protocol is called WebSocket. All right. Yeah, just remember, we're not using HTTPS here, okay? We're using WSS or WS. I believe the last S is secure socket layer, the secure, and the first one is not. All right, so any questions? Okay, so there is what's called WebSocket handshakes. This is the security protocols establishing the WebSocket connections. So handshakes is a slew of client to server and server to client communication. And a lot of times security handshake maybe 20 different trips, maybe 16, maybe 12 trips. WebSocket also does that. So there's a series of things that client server needs to establish. And these things happen really fast in these handshakes. The browser requests a WebSocket connection by sending a WebSocket handshake request, HTTP request that contains several headers like this. So WebSocket is a protocol, which is a communication style that includes this type of header and informations. If both sides, right, client and server talks WebSocket protocol, then it's like, they all talk this Martian language. And when both start to talk each other in this Martian language, both sides acknowledges each other because they understand each other. And this is the security handshakes. One sends the information back and check on the header, and the other one says, okay, I received it, I'll send you the private key. And it's very similar to security handshakes. So this WebSocket is important. It sets itself apart from HTTP, HTTPS, and the other protocols. So you do that. And in fact, the details of this handshake is not as interesting in my mind as what you can accomplish. But by knowing these security handshake allows you to be a better developer, because one, you know what's going on, and two, you know where to find issues, right? When you start to look into the header, you can see, oh, this is WebSocket, so there's these headers out there. So let me pay attention to it. If this accept is right, and then you start being able to kind of debug into the, by looking at the outcome of what transpires, and to troubleshoot. Okay. Yeah. So if you like to do some real time, data communications, WebSocket is your friend. Okay. I believe there's a couple of other like real time protocols where you can, like loan polling is another one that is very similar to WebSocket that you can use. So there are by and large some of these protocols out there. I believe Google also has a server sent event. Let me see if I can write it. Like server sent event, like SSE, right? So there's also WebSocket. There's the loan polling. Yeah, these are all persistent. One of the server-driven persistent connections where client doesn't have to pull them again. And Pio will just be, hey, don't bother me until you have something new. So this allows for kind of the modern stack server-driven communication, instead of having this polling, repeated polling mechanisms driven from the client side. I'm going to stop right here. Any questions about this? All right, there's some practices here. Yeah, please do that on your own. Yeah, if you're interested, yes, this WebSocket D, this is a command line tool for WebSocket server. You can go through this whole exercise, in fact, to create your own. If you have Mac or Linux in a Unix sense, and you can write some JavaScript to enable a dummy server and have that server spits back, the weather or something, or time of date or calendar. It's a very interesting lab. I think you can do that maybe in one afternoon using this. Okay, so it's a good lab exercise. I don't think you have that exercise here, but just so you know. Yep, there's a writing WebSocket. And in fact, it's just a couple lines of code. It's really not that hard. You can get this up and running if you're interested. You can pursue this as well. All right. Any questions so far on WebSocket? Hold on a second. Give me a second. All right. Let's move on to promises. All right. So I do have a couple of videos. I don't think I included here, but in my other JavaScript class, I I would go through maybe like the whole lectures on promises and fetch. I think I mentioned these things, right? You can also chain the promises. So what exactly is a promise? Let's get into this. All right, let me see how many chapters in, because right now I don't want to get you into information overload. Although you guys are already overload, right? Like we're here. So we got 3 sections here. So I'll just focus on more on a high level, because once you get into these participation activity, you get a lot more out of it. But I want to set you, on the right course so that you don't get, off tracked. Going into the wrong directions. Okay, so promises. So this is a very relatively new stuff in JavaScript ES6 plus. They didn't have this before. So promises is more a way of getting information back from the other side, like whoever was on the server side, asynchronously. In Java, in C++, in JavaScript, you can write asynchronous function. You can write synchronous function. So synchronous function means everything's blocking until you're done. And there's nothing interesting about it. This just means that if there is like 5 lines of code in your function, every single line of this code is evaluated one at a time, right? Starting from line 1 and line 2 and so on and so forth. Now, a synchronous function is a little different in that you would set off an asynchronous event, and this event will eventually come back to you. You don't have to wait, right, for a certain amount of time and blocking everything else. You can continue to do anything you like. Once the information is received by this event will come back and fire and tell you, right, that hey, this information is not received. That's a synchronous function, a function that executed a synchronous event. Synchronous function, there's no such event. It simply just, proceed with, blocking calls. And, until my synchronous function is done, you don't get to do anything else. Does it make sense? So that's the difference between synchronous function, asynchronous function. Promises is kind of associated with the asynchronous stuff, right? And yeah, in fact, let me see. So in general, the promises in JavaScript provides a way to work with asynchronous operations, right, in a more elegant and readable manner. In fact, in ES6 and actually ES5, there's no such thing. This is purely ES6 stuff, which came out in 2015. So there's specific syntax with promises, and we'll look into this. Okay, and I don't think right now we're talking about promises yet. Let's look at the asynchronous function. So let's say if you have this function that's like this, and there is a download sync, this download URL. You can imagine that in this particular function, this entire download is going to block, right, this entire line of statement until this entire download is done. Is that the case? Let's take a look. All right, so there is the dual implementation already uses download sync to download data asynchronously. So in fact, this entire download, this do work calls the download async as opposed to download sync. Okay, there's 2 different implementation. One of them is async function, the other one is a sync function. Sync function blocks everything on this data statement until something comes back. Download sync doesn't block. It simply takes the information and say, hey, this is async and go do your thing, right? So it spawns another thread to go out and do something. Meanwhile, the main thread where this do work is invoked, continue to evaluate a larger array and start sorting stuff. Yeah, I believe this is what this entire animation is calling for. So this takes 1,000 milliseconds. Yeah, and then it takes another, yeah, so you spend a total of 1.4 second for complete this in a synchronous fashion versus asynchronous fashion, which is on the right side. You have this, the entire async is doing its own thing at the same time, almost at the same time, right? This entire sorting, takes place, and there is a 120 millisecond. I think this 120 millisecond is the amount of time that it takes the download async to set up, because you have to somehow evaluate this, to some extent before kicking off some stuff. So the 120 prep work in there, and then off it goes, and the rest of it is spent on 400 milliseconds, because the very moment that this entire async is offloaded, while this other thread takes the instructions on asynchronously completing the task, the main thread, after 120 milliseconds, spends another 400 milliseconds, which is exactly the same amount of time it takes to complete the larger array sorting. So the end result is, using the async, right, embedded async, you're able to finish, your everything. It's almost like divide and conquer, right? Go out and start to parallelize the two operations, while one operation will asynchronously feedback when, the information when it's done, while the other one continues to do the other one in parallel. So this parallelism is enabled with promises. So promises allows you to build stuff like this, right? To turn something that is synchronous into asynchronous. Does it make sense? So you can also kind of think of, and the naming is kind of interesting, because the promise insinuates that, if you set up a promise, JavaScript promises you to get back to you once this thing is done. So that's really the essence of promise, right? It connotes to, hey, this is the promise, and it's going to be fulfilled at some time, and depending on how long this asynchronous task is going to take you. It could be 2 seconds, it could be 2 milliseconds. All right, without further ado, let's move on to promises object. So it turns out promise is an object. It's just an object, but it has its own logic to deal with the asynchronicity in JavaScript. And in fact, there are 3 different states. So this is kind of like a promise or JavaScript object that has its own kind of state machine that has different state. A promise object could be pending, meaning this thing is kind of working on its own. So it will output pending. The next one is fulfill. Fulfill means done, right? Rejected. Rejected means error, right? This errored out. The asynchronous operation didn't complete. So you can think of this object holding these 3 different types of results, depending on the outcome of that task, right? That was asynchronously triggered. And I guess the main thing about promises is you can resolve. Resolve means when done. This is the function or function expression that gets triggered when this entire promise object executing a synchronous event, having some sort of rejected state. Having some sort of fulfilled state. And reject is when the state becomes rejected. Okay, and this is triggered. This function expression is triggered when, depending on the state of that promise. Okay, so meanwhile, those asynchronous tasks could be a timer, that keeps firing until it reaches some numbers, or it could be asynchronous network communication call, and that's typically the case in conjunction with fetch API. Fetch allows you to issue, just like XML, HTML, HTTP requests, right? Issues a synchronous network call, and at some time, the result comes back. Promise is just like that. You set up a promise, you can do a fetch call out there and say, this promise object, tell me when this is done, okay? And promise is going to come back in, 4 seconds and say, hey, the entire transactions went through, and it will trigger a resolve, function expression. Or no, there's an error. Then in that case, the reject will call. And then as a developer, you fill out the logic that you want with respect to when resolve is called, and the same with reject. Okay, so that's kind of the the 3-state transitions inside the the promise object. Okay, so let's quickly take a look at this entire animations from start to finish. You have state to cloud asynchronous one. So this one, asynchronous calls for creation of a promise. So to create this entire promise object, you do instantiate a new instance of promise. So this promise is a class. So you do return new promise, right? And whatever this is returned, and you can totally do this is in JavaScript. You just return that whole promise object. All right, so when, we may have to do this again. All right, as you can see, when you invoke this async, it says null. This kicks off, right, a new promise creation, which involves this function results and object. So this is a function expression that's just going to be executed or evaluated asynchronously. So this entire thing is async, starting from function result object. So result and reject will be triggered until this entire thing is done, right? Which is 2 seconds. Number 4. So while this is still kind of working, the state is pending. Now, this entire user data in the beginning is null, so it calls the reject, and that says the entire state to be rejected. All right, so this is just a dummy code, but if you do sending informations about the key value pair data, then this user data is not going to be null. So when this entire promise is set up and this function is expression is evaluated, user data is not null. So this reject is going to be bypassed. Instead, it will go into the timeout 2 seconds. Let's take a look. Yep, exactly. So it goes into 2 seconds. So after 2 seconds, what happens is this entire result object is called. And that resolve object is going to trigger a fulfilled, right, state. So this is a life cycle of a promise object. I know this may sound still pretty advanced, not advanced, but pretty abstract. That's the nature of promise. It takes a little while. So I would recommend that you go into this promise doc, to really look at how this promise is, it's at work. And I think there's a lot of intricacy here that calls for some study time. So please don't just copy and paste code, but really look at the entire life cycle of a promise object. This entire chapter alone is pretty details, and it takes time, maybe one afternoon to go through. Okay. All right, so let's quickly go back. Oh, sorry, I think I missed. Yeah, I was telling about this one. So these are MDM professional. This is the documentation. Yeah, go to W3 School. I keep referring to that site because it's a lot easier to understand. All right, so that gives you the sort of the life cycle of promise object. You can also use chaining. This is what's called promise chaining. So promise, you can chain this then, as in when promise returns, promise actually returns a promise. And this promise object, could be appended to another then, right? So you can create this then method, as in when the promise gets returned, what it's going to do is whatever is specified inside the then. So this then could be another function expression that evaluates something completely different. Okay, this method can be called when the promise object is in any state. The fulfill callback function will eventually be called if either of the following is true. let me look around. I think I have a couple of videos that talks about promises from some example standpoint. I think this might still be pretty abstract. Let's look at this entire participation activities. So you have the safe user data that has this safe to it cloud async that we talked about earlier. And this, yeah, this creates a promise. And then after the promise returns, no, actually you can associate data safe with safe failed, these two functions, whichever gets back. So this then is gonna, hold on a second. So if save the data, if this completes, then you will say data safe. But if this save user data, which is a sync function, is not complete, then you will get save failed. Okay, on the other hand, this other one will be called. Okay, so this is how you change the outcome of a promise event. If the outcome is going to be successful, you can create this function expression. In this case, just a function called to this data save, and the other one is data failed. So you can specify this data save as X and the other one as a Y. It doesn't matter what your naming is, but just make sure that you know, you're able to cover your ground. It's kind of like creating an exception in Java. When something fails, you want that asynchronous event to call and be caught by the exception, and that then asynchronously prints or synchronously prints whatever the debug statement is to a console or anywhere of your choosing, but as long as you're alerted of the issue. Yeah, I've seen promises with pretty complicated, you know, set of whole bunch of dot then, right? Dot then. Just remember then, THEN, is a method sitting inside a promise object. So when a synchronous event returns with a promise object, you can do a dot then. This is the reason why you see a whole bunch of dot then, and then logic, and then dot then logic. So it's a chaining effect. I have some specific example that illustrates it. Let me see if this is yeah, this is just one example of the problem. So we already talked about this, right? Dot then there is an OK and fail function. You can use also, this is a very interesting cache. This is how you chain the whole thing, right? Instead of saying then, you know, try this and that, you can automatically capture the failed scenario using the catch. So again, this entire thing looks a lot like creating exception and trying to catch it in C++ and Java, right? But in JavaScript, you would actually write them like this. So you see this OK function could be a function expression that takes up like 10 lines of code. And then boom, 10 lines later, you see this dot catch, right? So in order to style this JavaScript, a lot of times you see a lot of these parentheses, curly braces, opening one, closing one, right? And then you don't know where things are. And that's why, you know, they use beautifier or prettifier to make your code a lot easier to understand. They'll automatically adjust, you know, the location of, you know, your function expressions, because at some point after you start to add, right, these expressions in them, yeah, it becomes really hard to read JavaScript code. That's the nature of it. And it's very easy to forget a closing parentheses, for example, and the whole thing doesn't compile, doesn't get interpreted the right way. All right. All right, folks, I'm going to pause right here. And this is definitely a very important, yet a chapter that involves some time to look into. Okay, so I know I only spent like 10 minutes on this, but you need to spend at least maybe an hour or two, right, to really get it. This entire, hold on a second. Yeah, this entire chapter 8.13 is very short. This covers maybe just 5% of what you need to know with promises. There is a lot more to it. Okay. Yeah, same thing with async and the wait. I think we probably went through this to some extent where I talked about network connections, right? Or web API. Yeah, there's a wait and you know, async is something that was introduced in 2017. So ES6 was 2015, and await and sync 2017. So this is super new. This is ES8, where you can specify async in a. So it's almost like, you know, trying to make something asynchronous. So what you need to do is attach the await keywords. So you'll see async, right, and you see await. This is another way of writing promises, but a lot easier, because, you know, this doesn't involve a whole bunch of promise chaining and then and catch, right? Instead, you can simply just specify, hey, I want to make this function asynchronous. Okay, that's fine. Just put async keyword in front of it. And hey, I want to await, meaning I want this thing to be asynchronous too. So when I call this async, I will wait for it, the outcome. And all you need to do is put wait. All right, but Professor, how do I know whether my JavaScript environment supports async and await? Well, make sure it's running ES8, right? ES9. Right now we have ES10, right? Yeah, so for older browsers, this won't work, but for latest browser today, yeah, this will work. So async and await has been kind of around for about 4 or 5 years now, and it has you know, pretty big support. And in fact, most of the browser today, they understand await and async. And if you get into like Node.js and try to do server-side JavaScript, yeah, you can use async and await as well. This is pretty standard these days now. So let's quickly look at what's going on with async and await. So this is the code that I have using this old school, you know, promises. Even though promise itself is only 2015, it's not really old school. 8 years ago, right? 8 years, right? But it's old school because it's not async and await, which is even more modern. So now you have these promises then, and it says loading data. Okay, fine. This promises then says, hey, when I get something back from, you know, load cloud async, this whole entire promise is then going to be triggering this, right, particular data loaded console log. All right, so this says data loaded, and it takes, I don't know, X number of milliseconds, maybe 2 seconds to load this, right? So that's how you kind of chain the promise. And when I say chaining, is promise dot then, right? But let's look at how to convert this into async and await. So now I have this load data async, and it says, hey, this entire thing is asynchronous. So all we need to do is to specify this entire function with the keywords called async in there. And then the entire execution again, when, you know, begins when this thing is invoked, right? And all of a sudden, hey, it says there's a await keyword. So this means that, you know, I want this to be asynchronously loaded when there's a, you know, information coming back from it, then give it to me, right? There's an equal sign. But otherwise, don't let this to be a blocker. I will wait for the event asynchronously. That's why there's an A in front of it, right? Asynchronous wait, right? And then boom, when this thing completes like 20 milliseconds later, this data will then be filled with stuff, and then you say data load data. That's it. All right. So this makes async makes a function asynchronous. Await means you know, I want to get data whenever you're done. So this is the kind of the entire flow examples. Any questions about this? All right, folks, I think we're pretty much at time, and this is Fetch API. I will post a video or two of this. In fact, we're going to use quite a bit of Fetch API in the next React class. If you guys are interested in taking it, yeah, there's going to be more. practices in that class about this fetch API. We'll probably get into it in third or fourth week of the class. But yeah, and you can think of it as the glorified version of XML HTTP request or AJAX. But this entire fetch API allows you to write things in a simplified fashion. So you can kind of go through the participation activity, and in fact, you can put together a sync and await in connection with fetch to get things. And with respect to fetch, you can also have response to JSON. Anyway, I feel like maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago we talked about fetch API to some extent. So this should be a more thorough review of what we talked about. So I'm not going to spend the whole time on this. But again, this is pretty short. There's a couple of PAs in it that you should be able to get through, okay? All right, folks, any questions about fetch API? Well, we haven't really gone through it deeply, but yeah, this should take maybe 1 hour to get through, and then you should have a good understanding of fetch API. So by and large, fetch API, starting with promises, async and await, fetch API, these are all part of the asynchronous JavaScript umbrella, event-driven. That is very useful in modern stack. And that's it, your entirety of week 7. And then you're gonna have for lab assignment, these twos are canvas drawings, and the very last twos are associated with what we just talked about. Okay. All right, folks. Any questions? So what I can do is I can stick around after this if you guys have any questions. But otherwise, yeah, I'll keep the Slack channels up for a couple of months, and if you can always reach out to me if you need anything, or you can email me directly at jsu12pasadena.edu. If you need a letter of recommendation and things like that, or you have specific questions about any homework assignment, you can reach out to me on Slack. This should complete our JavaScript course, and I know some of you had me for the last many weeks, and yeah, and then this completes the JavaScript portion of the course. You also have HTML, CSS. I think you guys are prime for the next class. If you're ever interested, we're going to be using React framework to build some web-driven, data-driven web applications in the next course. So you're going to learn a lot about this framework, single-page application framework that ties into a lot of what you learned today. Okay, so yeah, hopefully we'll see some of you in that class. And after that, there's also CIS197, which is a lot more advanced than the React class. You're going to be able to have the opportunity to form teams, to do projects together in a group fashion. And then you build an end-to-end data-driven web application that talks to a database, like registration system in 197. So yeah, you guys are pretty close, with 2 more classes to complete your web development certificate if you are interested in that path. And this should take you there.